What if I told you that the hyper-targeted algorithms that basically control your streaming and social media feeds today, well, what if they weren't actually invented by Silicon Valley tech executives?
Right, which sounds totally counterintuitive when you first hear it.
Exactly. Like, what if the absolute blueprint for modern content categorization, this idea of serving a microscopic subgenre to every conceivable demographic out there,
Yeah.
what if that was actually perfected over 20 years ago?
Yeah, on the incredibly crowded DVD and VHS shelves of the Japanese mature entertainment industry.
It's wild to think about.
Yeah.
But welcome to a brand new deep dive. I'm so glad you're here. Today's mission is to really explore this fascinating, super fast-paced, and highly specialized world of Japanese mature cinema.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to do that by charting the career of one of its most popular and honestly most prolific stars of the early 2000s. We're talking about Akira Watase.
Yeah, her timeline from around 2000 to 2005, it operates as this ultimate case study in media production.
Right. We have this massive stack of sources today. Biographies, industry encyclopedias, and these incredibly detailed filmography.
Which is great because we are going to examine how an individual is transformed into a multifaceted brand, and how an industry literally built a physical algorithm to dominate market share.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the sheer volume of output in these sources is just staggering.
Oh, it really is.
We are talking about an industry that produces specialized media at a relentless, almost industrial pace. But the underlying business mechanics are universally fascinating, even if you aren't familiar with the specific market at all.
Right, the mechanics apply to everything.
Exactly. So let's wind the clock back to the beginning. To understand her massive impact, we have to look at her starting line. She was born in July 1980 in Tokyo, Japan. But she didn't just walk in off the street into the mature cinema world to make her debut.
Far from it. I mean, before she even entered the specialized space, she was already a highly visible commodity. She was a top fashion model and a glamour idol. In fact, some of our French-language encyclopedic sources referred to her previous status as a mannequin de charme.
A mannequin de charme. I want to pause on that term for a second, because it essentially translates to a glamour model, right?
Yeah, basically.
But the Japanese industry has a very specific ecosystem for this. The sources mentioned she was a gravure idol. For you listening who might have no idea what that means, how does that fit into the broader media landscape?
So gravure is really a cornerstone of Japanese pop culture media. It involves posing for high-end men's magazines, typically in swimwear, but it is considered decidedly mainstream.
Like very public-facing.
Exactly. Gravure idols appear on television variety shows, they're in commercials, they act in mainstream dramas, so the talent pipeline we are looking at here is incredibly structured.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, transitioning from mainstream fashion modeling or gravure into mature cinema. It brings this immediate aura of prestige.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this and thinking, well, why would an established, successful model step into mature cinema? It comes down to the economics of that pipeline.
It really does.
It makes me think of like an indie darling, right? Someone who has this cool, established niche following, and suddenly they sign a massive, lucrative contract with a high-volume commercial film studio. It's a calculated, high-visibility career shift.
It is entirely calculated. She wasn't some unknown amateur trying to build an audience from scratch. She arrived with a built-in fan base, professional polish, and a very specific understanding of how to work a camera.
Which brings us to her official adult video debut in May of 2000. It was a release called Venus, produced by a studio called Cosmos Plan.
Right, a major release.
And looking at the sources, the branding was instantaneous. I mean, in a market flooded with new faces literally every single week, what exactly made her brand stick out so quickly on those crowded video store shelves?
Well, the industry relies heavily on the aggressive marketing of highly specific physical attributes. A performer needs a visual hook, something that transcends the performance itself so that a consumer immediately recognizes the product.
Like a trademark.
Exactly. For Akira Watase, the immediate trademarks were her smile, which reviewers frequently describe as Madonna-like or angelic, and her legs.
Oh my gosh, the sources cannot stop talking about the legs. They describe them as legendary, long, and slender. It became the absolute focal point of all her early marketing materials.
Because her fashion background meant she knew exactly how to highlight those features. She was bridging the gap between high fashion aesthetics and intimate entertainment.
Right.
The studios capitalize on these traits to create a recognizable character out of a real person.
Which brings us to the next phase, which honestly, this blew my mind. Once her brand was established, the industry didn't just say, okay, she's the glamorous model, let's just film her doing glamorous model scenes forever.
No, not all.
Instead, the strategy shifted entirely to capturing every possible micro-demographic. They grouped her releases into wildly different themes in rapid succession.
What's fascinating here is this is what we call the genreification of entertainment.
Genreification.
Yeah, the Japanese specialized media market is heavily driven by distinct, hyper-niche categories.
Let's look at the timeline because it moves incredibly fast. Venus comes out in May 2000. Just 2 months later, in July 2000, she stars in Marionette's Honey.
Mm-hmm.
And this one abandons the high fashion angle entirely to focus on the cosplay demographic.
Yeah.
We're talking maid costumes and specifically race queen outfits.
Right, and or race queen is the Japanese equivalent of a motorsport promotional model.
Okay, yeah.
They have massive, dedicated fan bases of their own. So by putting her in that specific outfit, the studio is tapping directly into the audience that follows comic conventions, motorsport events, and specific character tropes.
That makes total sense. But then, the very next month, August 2000, she releases Be My Dutch Wife. And the tone completely shifts again.
It's a hard pivot.
Yeah. This one places her in a highly dramatic, mature narrative. It involves intense dynamics with a doctor and a stranger. It's heavily plot-driven, almost theatrical.
Which caters to a completely different consumer. That release targets the audience looking for narrative tension and emotional stakes rather than just, costume visuals.
But it keeps going. Fast forward to December 2000, a release called Horny Bunny. They strip away all the complex narratives and dramatic plot lines.
Right, back to basic.
Exactly. It's purely an aesthetic showcase, focusing entirely on her curves and the visual appeal. And then, just a month later in January 2001, a release simply titled Number One. This one taps into a highly popular subgenre, which the sources note is designed to mimic the exact experience of specific bathhouse establishments in Japan.
Yeah, the soapland aesthetic. Soaplands are bathhouses deeply embedded in Japanese nightlife culture.
Wow, okay.
So recreating that specific environment on film taps into an audience looking for very specific situational mimicry.
So we have high fashion, cosplay, dark drama, pure aesthetics, and situational bathhouse mimicry, all within about 8 months of her debut.
It's a lot.
Now wait, I have to push back a little here. You're framing this as a sophisticated strategy of ubiquity to capture micro-demographics. But isn't this just like throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks?
That's a fair question.
How do we know this was calculated risk management and not just a studio churning out random content to meet an aggressive production quota?
Well, that is the crucial distinction to make when looking at this industry. It wasn't random. It was a highly managed portfolio approach.
Okay.
The physical video store shelf was a brutal environment. If a performer only does one type of specialized media, the audience experiences brand fatigue incredibly quickly, no matter how famous or physically striking the performer is.
Because they just see the exact same cover over and over again.
Precisely. By placing her in cosplay, then drama, then situational mimicry, the studio mitigates their financial risk.
Well, I see.
If the cosplay demographic doesn't buy the July release, the narrative-focused demographic will definitely buy the August release. It ensures that the audience never tires of her persona because they are constantly rediscovering her in new contexts.
It sounds exactly like the algorithm of a modern streaming platform, where every possible viewer preference has its own microscopic subcategory.
That is exactly what it is, a physical algorithm.
She is essentially a different character for every possible viewer preference. If you like the race queen aesthetic, you might enjoy this other niche.
Absolutely.
Before we move on to how they expanded this even further, just a quick pause. If you're enjoying the vibe, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends. It really helps us out.
Yes, definitely do that.
Okay, so we have this intense domestic market dominance. She did take a brief, well-deserved retirement in 2001, but the break didn't last long.
No, it rarely does in this industry.
Right. She returns in 2002. And here is where we need to look at how a brand scales up. Because she doesn't just come back to do the exact same things. She joins a new studio, Moodyz, and she starts pushing the boundaries of her brand, both geographically and legally.
Yes, this is a major turning point.
Let's look at the geographic extension first. We have a thematic shift into the economics of artificial scarcity and premium content.
Right. Once a talent has conquered the domestic micro-niches, the most effective way to elevate their market value is to cross borders or cross regulatory lines.
The sources point to specific 2002 and 2003 titles shot on location in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Now, we'll keep the exact titles out of it to keep things brand safe, but these were high-profile international collaborations featuring diverse casts. From a production standpoint, it's a massive logistical step up from shooting on a standard soundstage in Tokyo.
Oh, absolutely. Consider the logistics involved. Flying a crew, securing international locations, hiring local foreign talent, and dealing with international production permits.
That's a huge investment.
It is, and it adds an undeniable premium value to the product. Shooting overseas signals to the consumer that this star is of an international caliber, which justifies a higher price point or drives massive rental volume.
And while she is shooting these high-budget international collaborations, she also diversifies into mainstream adjacent media.
Yes.
In November 2004, she stars in a softcore V-Cinema release called Pretty Bus Tour Guide. It's an erotic drama, but it's not hardcore.
Right. V-Cinema refers to direct-to-video films in Japan, and it frequently serves as a professional bridge.
A bridge to where?
Well, it allows performers from specialized media to flex traditional acting muscles. It reaches a broader, perhaps more conventional audience who might not purchase explicit adult entertainment, but they are drawn to erotic thrillers or softcore dramas.
So she's bridging into softer, more mainstream territory. But simultaneously, she is shattering the absolute strictest legal boundary in her industry.
Yeah, she went in both directions at once.
The sources note that she participated in uncensored videos, specifically highlighting a release called Super Idol Vol. 33 by a company called Fantadream in November 2003.
A huge deal at the time.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to admit some total confusion here regarding the mechanics of this. How does an industry that is famously heavily regulated by strict domestic censorship laws manage to distribute completely uncensored material to the public?
To understand the mechanics of that, we have to look at Article 175 of the Japanese Penal Code, which regulates public morals.
Okay.
Under domestic law, adult media produced and sold within Japan must obscure specific anatomical details. This is universally done through digital mosaic blurring.
The infamous mosaic. I mean, it is the defining characteristic of Japanese mature cinema.
Exactly.
So if it's illegal to sell without the mosaic, how are fans getting their hands on Super Idol Vol. 33 in 2003?
Because consumer demand for the forbidden is always incredibly high, the industry developed complex legal workarounds. Often, these uncensored releases were produced by seemingly independent offshore entities.
Oh, wow. Like international shell companies.
Yeah, exactly. A studio might set up a shell company in a different jurisdiction, say in the United States, or a less regulated territory.
That is wild.
Then the physical DVDs are distributed through independent, non-retail networks like direct-to-consumer mail order or specialized gray market subscription services.
So it's less like a hidden club and more like digital bootlegging. Setting up a shell company in another jurisdiction so the domestic laws technically can't touch the point of sale.
That is a very accurate way to look at it. The transaction happens completely outside the purview of the standard domestic retail shelf.
Right.
For a top-tier, mainstream-adjacent star like Akira Watase to appear in an uncensored release, it's a massive event. It carries this rebellious cachet.
Yeah, veggie.
The audience feels like they are acquiring something rare, illicit, and fundamentally beyond the heavily regulated standard fare.
Which perfectly explains how she managed to maintain such a massive, inescapable profile. Between the domestic micro-niches, the international LA shoots, the softcore V-Cinema acting, and the uncensored underground gray market, she was everywhere.
Ubiquitous.
And the raw numbers reflect that strategy.
Yeah.
Over the course of her active career, from roughly 2000 to mid-2005, she starred in over 200 releases.
Which is staggering. Let's do the math on that. 200 films over a 5-year period, and that's even factoring in her brief hiatus in 2001.
Yeah.
That averages out to roughly 40 releases a year.
That is almost a new release every 9 days. The physical and mental toll of that kind of production schedule is hard to even comprehend. You're constantly on set, constantly doing press, constantly switching genres.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
So it's really not surprising that in mid-2005, at the age of 25, she officially retired from the industry. She walked away as one of the most popular, prolific stars of her era.
And it appeared to be a totally clean break. The narrative of the young star retiring at the peak of her popularity is a very common, very marketable storyline in Japanese media.
But in the world of digital media, a star's image never truly retires, does it?
Sadly, no.
Fast forward to August 2008. She has been completely out of the game for 3 years. Suddenly, a brand new release is announced. But it's not under the name Akira Watase. It's under a brand new alias, Rei Narumi.
And we really need to look at who is releasing this. It was put out by Deeps, which is a label operating under Soft On Demand, or SOD.
Okay, and they are huge, right?
Massive. SOD is an absolute titan in the Japanese adult entertainment conglomerate space.
So you have this massive conglomerate putting out a new DVD in September 2008. Fans see this new name, Rei Narumi. They see the marketing, they buy the physical copy, thinking they're getting the triumphant return of a legend who has been in hiding. But the sources reveal a brilliant, if somewhat deceptive catch. This new 2008 release was actually just a clever re-edit of footage originally shot back in 2005. She never actually stepped foot on a set in 2008.
No, she didn't. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where we see the ultimate business mechanics of content ownership in action.
Yeah, break that down for us.
When a performer signs a contract to shoot a film in this high-volume industry, they almost never retain the rights to their own image or the raw, unedited footage. The production studio owns the intellectual property entirely.
It totally reminds me of the music industry. You know when a legendary musician leaves a label and suddenly the label starts releasing vault tracks or posthumous albums?
Exactly the same playbook.
They take an old, unused vocal take, put a slightly new beat behind it, give it a fresh album cover, and sell it as a brand new project. This is exactly that, just with visual media. They repackaged old material under a brand new name to generate fresh sales from unsuspecting fans.
And consider the profit margins on that strategy. It costs the studio almost nothing.
Wow, right.
They do not have to negotiate a new contract with the star. They don't have to pay a new day rate, rent a set, or hire a lighting crew. They simply pay an in-house editor to splice together alternate takes, maybe change the color grading, print a new cover with a new alias, and boom, capitalize on the nostalgia of the fan base.
It highlights a very stark power dynamic. She had physically moved on with her life. She had retired. But her digital ghost was still being put to work by a massive conglomerate to generate capital.
It forces us to realize that in these hyper-industrialized media spaces, the human being is often secondary to the intellectual property they generate.
Yeah.
The studio isn't selling Akira Watase the person, they're selling the visual assets they own. The brand, quite literally, outlives the active career.
Which really brings this whole deep dive into focus. When you trace this career from 2000 to 2005, and that subsequent 2008 release, you aren't just looking at the biography of a popular star in the Japanese mature entertainment industry.
No, it's so much bigger than that.
You were looking at a strategic model for understanding how modern media works on a fundamental level. We saw the heavily structured talent pipeline that moves established prestige into specialized dominance. We analyzed the intense algorithmic categorization of content, that physical video store algorithm that placed her in cosplay, drama, aesthetics, and specialized scenarios to capture and retain every single viewer demographic without causing brand fatigue.
Right. We also looked at the economics of artificial scarcity, how crossing geographic borders to Los Angeles and utilizing offshore shell companies to bypass strict domestic censorship laws can elevate a standard brand into an illicit premium product.
Exactly. And finally, we saw the clever, almost ruthless repackaging of intellectual property, where a studio can create a comeback out of thin air using recycled footage and a new alias.
The strategies pioneered and perfected in this highly specialized, often overlooked industry, they are not isolated phenomena.
No, not at all.
They are the exact same mechanics used by mainstream influencers, digital marketers, and massive streaming platforms today to capture, categorize, and keep your attention.
So what does this all mean? It means the media landscape we navigate every day on our phones and our televisions was built on the blueprints of industries we rarely talk about in polite conversation.
Yeah, that's the truth.
The algorithm isn't just a piece of code, it's a business strategy that was perfected on video store shelves decades ago.
It leaves you looking at the entire concept of media production through a completely different lens.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because if a studio can continuously re-edit, rename, and resell a performer's image years after they've walked away. Wait, no, let me rephrase that. If they can puppet a digital ghost to keep generating revenue without the artist ever having to step on a set again, it leaves you wondering about the sheer mechanics of legacy.
Absolutely.
Who truly owns the legacy of a digital artist? Is it the person who lived it or the corporation that holds the hard drives? It's something to think about the next time you see a new release, a vault track, or an unseen footage dropped from a star who has long since left the stage.